Let me tell you about a client I worked with years ago. She was 14, and her parents brought her to therapy because she was flunking her classes, and she wasn't following their rules at home, and she was suddenly getting very angry at them. She was yelling at them, she was telling them to go to hell, that sort of thing. The parents were understandably concerned about their child, and this was back in the day when I did in-home therapy. I would meet with the family in their house, and so the 14-year-old, she hated me. She really hated me. She didn't want to be in therapy. She hated her parents. She hated everyone pretty much except for her friends. She just wanted to spend all of her time with her friends. And she would sneak out at night to be with her friends. And she would sneak out to be with older boys sometimes. Her parents were understandably frustrated. And they were probably scared of what she would do. The parents wanted me to connect with her, but it wasn't easy. The client, she refused to talk to me. We spent many hours just sitting in silence. It was hard work for me, I must say. There were times when I just wanted to give up. Sometimes she would just lay on the couch while I desperately tried to get her to talk with me. She was fairly frustrating for me. But over time, over many sessions, the 14-year-old client began to trust me. She began to open up about how much she was suffering, and how awful she felt, and how angry she was, and how sad she was. I found out that she was in a constant state of emotional distress. It was an ongoing, relentless emotional suffering for her. It wasn't just depression. It was something perhaps deeper than that, something more excruciating. So I focused on empathizing with her suffering. I really wanted her to know that I understood the suffering that she was experiencing. And I avoided the countertransferential impulse to tell her to behave. You know, lots of people reacted to her in this way. They reacted to her by telling her, look, you got to follow the rules and you got to be responsible. And I really tried to avoid that because her behavior really provoked that in me and other people. And as she began to trust me, our sessions developed into a new rhythm. At the beginning of the session, she would roll her eyes at me at first. You know, she wouldn't want to talk much. And then I would spend about 25 minutes working hard to convince her that I cared about her suffering. And then she would shift and she would eventually soften and she would tell me about how she hated everybody and how she hated herself, really. And then one day she revealed that she had been cutting for several months. She was cutting on her arm. She showed me the scars on her upper arm. We were talking in her bedroom and she pulled out a box from under her bed. I looked in the box and it was a supply kit for self-injury. There were razor blades, there was rubbing alcohol, there were bandages, there were lots of stuff like that. She told me that she was addicted to cutting herself. She told me that she never told anyone before, and she seemed very ashamed of it. I asked her why she did it, and she said she cut because it made her feel better. It made her feel better. This was very strange to me at the time. I had this didn't make any sense to me at that time. How could cutting your arm make you feel better? The thought of cutting my upper arm with a razor blade gave me the heebie-jeebies. So I didn't know how to deal with it. It was confusing and it was scary to me. So I consulted with some colleagues and I got a mixed reaction. Some of my colleagues said she was just trying to get negative attention from other people. Some said she was just practicing for suicide. And some said she was addicted to pain. I didn't know what to think. So I decided to read the literature on cutting and self-injury. And I also tried to understand her experience of cutting. Not only just reading the literature and the research, but I really focused on trying to understand what it was like for her. And I learned a lot from her, from that first client that cut. Since then, I have been providing treatment and supervision on cutting. I find that most people, including many clinicians, have a very limited understanding of cutting and self-injury. And then I received an email from patron Bianca. She wrote, "Hey, Dr. Kirk, love the podcasts. I would love to hear you guys do a podcast on self-harm. Well, since you're a patron, your wish is our command. So today we'll be talking about the research regarding cutting, and we'll be talking about what it's like for the client, why do they do it, what it feels like, and I'll provide some treatment guidelines and some stories of real people that cut as well." Welcome to the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I am chair of the Couple and Family Therapy program at Antioch University, Seattle, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. This episode is just for patrons of the podcast, so if you're listening to this and you're not a patron of the podcast, this episode will end before the content begins. If you want to hear the full episode, you have to become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com